Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to the weekly updates of the 2020 elections. And really, I'm going to focus more on the presidential one. At least for now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Senate and gubernatorial elections throughout, or not throughout, but at the end. But of course, I do want to focus on president, and I'm debating whether or not I should include certain hypothetical matchups. I may save those for Fridays, and I'll discuss what I think about the matchups as well as whether or not, and each hypothetical matchup, I'm not going to do it as in saying this is what the forecast will, this is what the election will be. I'm probably going to establish a range where I think a competitive election could fall within, because I think that's the smart thing to do, and especially this far out, making a dead set prediction is just a way to fail, and this far out, it's a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. Yeah, it may be more popular to do it that way, but I don't think it's the correct decision if you're trying to actually get an idea of what the election could look like. Anyway, so before I get into explaining this map, which is my model's forecast, and remember, my model is more of if the election were held today, this is what I would expect, based off of what the model is spitting out. And my own personal forecast will always factor in a regression towards mean, towards a competitive election, as we should expect based off of historical analysis and other factors. And actually, I want to do quick go. What is Dow doing right now? Okay, that doesn't help me at all. I want to look at what it is doing today. That's at close February. It closed February 15. I don't use just this. It's still a close. There we go. Let's go to CNN Money. As much as by the way, this is really good. The year to date is really good. So I'm not going to be able to check that. That's absolutely fantastic. It's Monday. Oh, that's why. Today is President's Day, isn't it? Anyway, apparently today is a market holiday, or bank holiday if you're a Brit. So the three 2020 Democrats that Trump's campaign is watching most closely, apparently according to their aides, they're focusing on Kamala Harris, by the way, collecting opposition research. And Trump is really good opposition research, by the way. Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, and Cory Booker. And Trump is actually focusing on Biden. And by the way, this is on Politico. So you can trust these guys because they compile articles from everywhere, but they also have some of their own stuff written by some very credible people. And this summary, and I read the entire article, this screams very intelligent. Focusing on Harris, Warren, and Booker for the campaign, and also Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden is the Democrat who has the best chance in a general against Trump. Much better than, say, Sanders, really better than anyone. If I was a Trump campaign, I would be extremely worried about Biden. However, Biden might not survive a primary, even if he does run, because he has such a long career. It's going to be very difficult for him to appeal to Democratic primary voters of the 2020 cycle, because he just really isn't progressive enough. Yes, he has a ton of old school working class Midwest appeal. Sherrod Brown has this to a degree, but is slightly more progressive, enough to where he has progressive credibility. Biden just doesn't. From his stance on firearms, being fairly moderate, from being as moderate as most Democrats can be, to his previous stances on LGBT issues, to his stance on Iraq, back when he was still in the Senate. He's even expressed support for a physical barrier on the southern border before. His Senate voting record is about as moderate as they come for Democrats. Truthfully speaking, he might not be able to survive a Democratic primary, and a lot of those polls that show him far and away the most popular Democrat in primary polls, chances are that's mostly because of name recognition, and that gap is going to shrink. It really is. But as you go further in the article, you realize that they're looking at not just the front people who they consider front runners, Harris, Warren, and Booker, but they're looking at other people like Bloomberg. They're looking at who else was mentioned? And they also seem to think, they also looked at, say, a Klobuchar and a Gillibrand. And they even looked at O'Rourke. And they do think that it's actually going to wind up being a dark horse, somebody who kind of makes themselves known later on in the cycle, rather than any of the hyped up big names, which, hey, that can happen. It actually seems to happen a lot more than you would think. Obama was not the hyped up name he was meant to, he wound up being in 2008. Bernie Sanders almost filled that role in 2016. And it seems that they're running their campaign, at least their opposition research scouting right now. They're doing it very well, but they're keeping tabs open on other people. This screams that this is incredibly, incredibly smart from the Trump campaign. Say what you will, but his campaign is not dumb. His campaign research is not dumb. It is extremely intelligent and extremely well done. This is another reason why you really should not underestimate the Trump campaign and his re-election chances. And I mean, Obama has hinted that much in his talks with some of the 2020 Democrats. That's another Politico article that was a New York Times article. I would advise reading that one if you can as well. Sorry for the long intro, but let's talk about what my model is saying would happen in the election if it were to happen today. First of all, if you go down to the national forecast, it says I'm going to keep this at a little bit over 39.7% to 44%. 16% undecided. That's going to shrink over time. And remember, I don't allocate the undecided votes, the other slash undecided votes, because I don't think that's the intelligent thing to do right now. Right now is a key word. I may do that later on, but that would produce an assumed regression towards mean, and allocating undecided votes is a terrible strategy if I'm trying to forecast accurately, because we don't know how they're going to be how that undecided vote is going to split, and it's going to split differently in different states. For example, in Utah, this 11% is probably going to mostly go to Donald Trump, whereas let's go to California. This 3% is probably going to go to whoever the Democrat is. Let's find a state with more undecideds that's Democrat leaning. This 5% in Oregon is probably going to go towards the Democrats. But overall, we don't know what that breakdown's going to wind up being. So I think it's a smart thing not to assume anything. And the reason why I have the economic factor as high as it is because the economy is doing fairly well. If you look at the index funds, Dow Jones, the S&P, and the NASDAQ, as well as consumer confidence, inflation rate, unemployment rate. Historically speaking, these have been very good indicators that the economy is doing fairly well, and they're all in the positive. And the Federal Reserve is taking a hands-off approach. As I've said before, that's a very good thing. Anyway, and we break it down. I'll go talk about some of the states that kind of might be a little surprising. So Florida and Arizona are both listed as tilt Republican, and that's because they're within a single percent. Both are on the edge of that single percent. Arizona here, we've got 48 and change versus 47 and change. We go to Florida, where it's 49 and change versus 48 and change. Let's look at some of these states. Pennsylvania is actually on the edge. Let's scroll all the way down to Pennsylvania here. 48 and change versus 49 and change. It's almost in that tilt Democrat range, meaning it is narrowing. We're experiencing regression towards mean as it stands. Go up to Michigan and Minnesota, right here. Those are narrowing as well. Let's go to Texas. It's becoming more and more favorable to Donald Trump. And obviously right now we don't have a set Democrat. We don't have general election polling for a generic Democrat versus Donald Trump. So right now this is still very rough, and any state that isn't solid could be considered competitive. So that means our range would be how many? This means that we have, essentially, and New Mexico is actually on the range of getting to where I would consider it competitive territory. But the amount of votes that are currently, in my opinion, and what the model says, and I would agree with the model at least in terms of what is competitive. Alaska is also close to being competitive too, so you can include that if you want. I'm a little skeptical about Texas, but I'll leave it here. I'll say my model is at least, saying it's possible. And I would agree it is possible that a Democrat could win the state of Texas. I don't think it's likely at all, though. My model says that there's 225 electoral votes up for grabs this cycle, and I would reasonably agree with that. And we'll go to what my personal forecast is. We'll start with the states that I would consider likely for both sides, as in it would take a bit of a monumental effort to screw those up. And when I say likely, this is a confidence measure rather than a percentage measure. So a Democrat could win Virginia by about 6 points in 2020, but Minnesota by only a single point. Yet I'm still reasonably confident that the Democrat is going to carry them both. As in, I think it would still take a monumental effort to lose them. It would take an absolute travesty of a campaign for a Republican to lose South Carolina at this point, or Indiana, or Missouri, yeah. And it would take a monumental travesty of a campaign for a Democrat to lose Illinois, or California, or Washington, or New Mexico, or New York at this stage. Things obviously can and will change. I actually think it's likely that that Donald Trump will capture this vote. States that I'm going to consider a lean, meaning I think we can confidently say that party has an advantage in that district/state. You know, it would take a tremendous, I mean, it's easily possible that a Republican could lose the 2nd district in Nebraska, or Arizona, or North Carolina, or Florida. You know, these are reasonably competitive states. Actually, I meant to include Iowa is likely, and Ohio is likely. Sorry. You know, these are states that I think are going to be competitive. These are states that I am positive, you know, the lean states are positive that they're going to be competitive, and they really are battlegrounds. And then states that tilt, these are states that I actually would mark as true toss-ups, but I do it when I make a forecast, I forecast every state. Because I think including something as a toss-up is kind of a cop-out. Unless I really absolutely cannot make a decision one way or another, and I think both arguments that a Democrat or a Republican could win are they are 100% dead equal. And I think it really is a coin flip. Then I'll consider listing it as a true toss-up. But even then, I'll try and figure out which argument holds more water. But when I mark a tilt, it's a state I consider to be a true toss-up. I just think one side has a slightly better chance of winning than the other. And as of right now, I think Wisconsin breaks for the Democrats, and Pennsylvania would break for Donald Trump and the Republicans. Now, of course, all of this is subject to change this far out. At the moment, this is where I'm seeing it based off of the assumption that the race gets competitive and that people people don't treat Trump differently than any other president, which is the only assumption I have to make, because if I assume that Trump is going to be treated as this great president, well, that's just not that's not the correct way to do it if I'm trying to be accurate. And if I assume every scandal is going to sink him, then I just haven't been paying attention. Nor would it be a genuine prediction, because it would be assuming that every Democrat would slaughter him, which is, number one, clearly not the case, and number two, it puts my bias heavily in the favor of any Democrat. Whereas if I were to assume the opposite, where every scandal is going to sink the Democrats, that's just giving the bias too much in Trump's favor. So I'm trying to assume that whatever happens, happens, and that Trump is kind of like every other president, except for tone. And even then, I'm deciding I'm not going to factor in tone, because that is way too subjective. Some people like his tone, and where Trump's tone is appreciated and well-liked, he is exceedingly popular. However, where it is not liked, he is exceedingly unpopular. Okay? The reality is that Trump is extremely polarizing, and in today's age of extreme political polarization and extreme tribalism, assuming a competitive race is the correct thing to do, unless you just want to throw your predictions completely out the window. So, in order to attempt to be credible, I have to make some decisions that are going to leave people pissed off on both sides of the fence. Because to me, I'm not trying to push an agenda or anything. I'm just trying to make an accurate prediction. For me, being correct trumps whatever I want. Okay? And yes, this is coming from someone who has the Libertarian logo as their channel logo. You know, the Libertarian porcupine is their channel logo. But, yeah. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for watching and putting up with me doing a bit of a longer video. By the way, I don't think the only two states I think might reject their Senate candidate is, why is it Sabato's crystal ball? I'm just going to use this as my base. I honestly don't think that any state will reject the president. As a matter of fact, I consider this completely safe for the Republicans. I'll lean that to the Democrats, and I'm actually going to lean this to the Republicans. And the presidential race is going to be reasonably predictive of the Senate results. And as of right now, I am considering this the vice presidency a lean towards the Republicans. It won't allow me to do the gradient, so instead I can only create as safe. But I'm assuming, or not assuming, my prediction says this is a lean to the Republicans. But if you want to go with my model right here, you can say that this is a lean to, or not even a lean, but well, actually it would be a lean to the Democrats. The only state that would, actually none of these states would be different than stated. So we're looking at a 52-48 Senate. And a Senate that looks like that. As for gubernatorial elections, I'm keeping my prediction the exact same. And I will go to the House interactive map, but what I'm going to say is that is pretty much that's going to flip. Yeah, that's probably going to flip. This district will likely, well, maybe not likely. I think Republicans are going to become much, much closer to the I honestly think that that Republicans are probably going to gain a handful of seats. I'm not sure what the range is going to be. I'll do my research and try and have that next week. But I'll do what I can. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Hope you all enjoy. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.